Hey Beacon, welcome home to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community podcast, where you are challenged to be, do, and have God's best as you thrive on your journey from setback to success. I'm your Bounce Back guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers, and I'll be guiding you on the journey by sharing tips, tools, and the tea on how I was able to bounce back from escaping death, healing from heartbreak, and finding hope in homelessness. And then I wrote an award-winning book all about it. And shout out to God, ever since I was courageous enough to share my story, my life and the lives of women around the world have been forever changed. And as a member of the Bounce Back Blueprint community, I'm called to teach you to do the same. So grab your journal and let's build this blueprint. Hey Beacon, hey, before we start building the blueprint this week, I've got to bless you with this week's review. And this week's review was such a blessing to me. So this week's review comes from Coaching with Jose Miguel. Goodness, I'm tongue-tied. And he says, storyteller, God-led, and full of light. OMG, Tiffany is such an inspiration. Her stories are filled with joy and blessings. I immediately found myself screaming yes with each episode. I listened to and feel that I've become a member of her Beacon community. Thank you, lady. My favorite episode is Unshakable Joy. So relevant to today's world, and everyone should jump head first into this. Thank you for this blessing, Tiffany. Thank you so much, Jose. And if you have not already, please do take a moment or two and leave a review, because when you do, you create an opportunity for another Beacon to be blessed by this podcast and also, like Jose, become a part of the Beacon community. I am excited to share today's episode with you. It is actually a class that I did for a group around how to get started with writing your book. Again, answering you guys' questions based on the episode I did about finishing the year strong and really reflecting and reclaiming your life and getting back into position purposefully. So, how to start writing your book. There's so many jewels here. You're going to be so blessed by this. Make sure you have your journal, and also make sure that you share this with someone else who you know has a goal to get their book written and has been struggling. This episode is going to bless you, I promise. I look forward to your feedback. Let's go ahead and dig in, and hopefully some other people will pop in, and I will come back in here and there and check for your comments and questions as we go along. So this is how to start writing your book today. For those of you who are new to me or the Tiffany Huff experience or not familiar, my name is Tiffany Huff Struthers. I am an evangelist. I'm an award-winning author and entrepreneur, and I do some speaking and coaching around all things women and helping, empowering, equipping women to be, do, and have all that God has called them to. Specifically, though, I work with women who are challenged to recover from setbacks and want to share their stories and or experiences to make an impact, which one of the ways I do that is through coaching women to write their books. So that is a little bit about me. You may have seen me on some of these platforms. And if you want to connect with me anywhere else in the internet streets, I am at the Tiffany Huff on all platforms. So I want to make sure that everybody knows this is honesty hour. It was supposed to be private honesty hour, but because technology does what it does, we are here together. But this is still a safe space for you to become face to face with whatever is challenging you. And I always tell my clients, you cannot conquer what you refuse to confront. So tonight we are going to confront some things so that you can conquer them and get down to the business of writing your books. Where to start in that time commitment, or two things that are often challenges that my clients find they need to conquer. So here's where I want to start with you this evening, because so many people that I work with tell me that they have writer's block. Even though they know they have a story to tell, they sit down to write and they're just blocked. And I am a firm believer that writer's block is a myth. Writer's block is a myth. It is not a real thing. If you have a story, if you have something to say, if you have something on your mind, then you have something to write. It may not be the thing or the story that you want to write when you sit down, but if you have something on your mind, then there is something you have to write about. And so one of the biggest misconceptions is that when you sit down to write, you have to immediately write that bestseller. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to write through the muck to get through to the message. So I want you to keep that in mind as we move through this evening. So when I work with my clients, I use this 3C system. Starts out with clarity. And once you get clarity, then you have to work through having the courage to do whatever you've gotten clarity about. And then like Lachelle said, you have to be willing to make the commitment to see the entirety of the process through. And these are all three very challenging pieces of the process that the women I work with have. Because sometimes the story we think we want to write is not necessarily the story that God would have us to write. Or once we get that real clarity, the message kind of changes, which requires some deep digging to have the courage to write through said message, and then the commitment to continue to do the writing even when it gets challenging, even when all of that stuff and muck comes up. So I want you to consider these 3 steps also: clarity, courage, and commitment. And you can consider, where do you think you are right now at this stage? Do you think you've not started writing because of lack of clarity? Is it the courage piece? Is it the commitment? Let me know in the comments where you feel like you are in this process or on this journey, so that I can make sure I address your challenges or needs specifically. So when we talk about having clarity, we talk about the importance of starting with why, right? A lot of times when people are starting to write a book, they think about all of the W's and save why for last, right? So we think about what we want to write. We think about who might buy the book or who might have something to say about what we're writing. We think about when we want the book to be finished, not so much when we will write, but when we want the book to be finished. And we might even consider how we will publish the book, but it's very rare that we start with why. And so if I asked you now why you wanted to write a book, or why you feel like you are called to write a book, what would your response be? Why is it that you are on this training? Why is it that you are trying to write a book? Clarity and commitment, courage and commitment. Okay. Do you know your why? So I want to really take some time with this question, because like I said, the answer to this question impacts everything else. So if you don't have clarity on your why, then it's going to be very challenging for you to start writing. And I will give you an example for why knowing your why is important. I had a session with a client who wants to write a story, or wants to write the story of her journey through having had a child who was very ill, and her child passed away, right? She says she feels very led to write this story, but she doesn't think she would have a whole story to write, She feels like telling the story of what happened would only take a chapter or two, so her book wouldn't be long enough. And so I have to take her through the process of understanding why she is writing this story or this book. It's less about um, it's less about what necessarily happened in and of itself, but what changed after whatever you're going to write about happened. How were you impacted? How was your life impacted? How would others be impacted? So it's one thing to know you have a powerful story to share, but your why is really about what will happen as a result of you sharing. If that makes sense, let me know. I had another client who had um, a very similar challenge. She had been carjacked, and she said she felt very strongly she was supposed to write about having been carjacked. However, she had the same issue. She was like, after I tell about what happened when I got carjacked, then what do I write about? And so often we get caught up in what to write that we lose sight of the importance of why. So when something happens to you, it's not taking anything away from what happened to you, what you grew through, or what you endured. But the why really is rooted in the impact that having had that experience and being able to tell that experience will have. That's what's going to influence the way you tell your story and why you tell your story. That's what gives your book the depth, so that it's beyond one or two chapters. So I really want you to consider, as we move through, because we are going to keep going, but I want you to really consider why it is that you are writing what you are writing. So Tina, you said to tell your story and reach out to others like you. Right. So I think that we all know that our stories connect with other people, but I want you to get even more specific. Why do people like you need your story? Why do single Black mothers who are struggling need your story? This is what is very important. This is what's going to keep you writing. This is what's going to keep you being courageous and committed as you move through the process. So you want to get crystal clear about this. And it's going to take some time. Don't take for granted the importance of starting with why and think that you need to just start writing. This process is important, not only to you starting, but you being able to finish your book. And then also it will be very important to what happens once your book is finished and published. Okay. So that is number one. That's where I always start with my clients. That's where we dig deep. And to be quite honest, we spend a lot of time here to be sure you are writing the right book. So the next process, this is a process that I take my clients through, and I call it the dump, right? And it is a process that we use, just like you see here, index cards, and I also use Post-it notes. And so what the dump is, and if you don't have index cards right now, it's okay. You can use a clean sheet of notebook paper. What the dump is, what I have clients do is on each index card, write down one thing about their story. Now, if you already know what you're going to write about, then you can be a little bit more strategic with your index cards. But I'm going to give you an example of how the dump will work. So when I wrote my book, 30 Day Stay, I knew that each chapter was going to be a day, right? So on each index card, I wrote a day. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and I had 30 cards specifically for each chapter, right? But then I had to go back and think about all of the things that led to me being there day 1, right? So I had to write things down like my relationship. And I had to write things down like I got shot. I had to write things down like calling the police. So you want to dump out every detail that you can think about, right? If you have a timeline, you could do it by year. and dump out your topics. You could do it by chapter, the way I did it, because I had a specific process in mind, or you can just dump everything you think about with your story. And one of the keys that is really important when you do the dump is, just like you see here pictured, you want to have 2 colored index cards. And I would suggest you do like a green and a yellow, a green and a red, or a bright color and a darker color. And here's why I suggest green and yellow. On the green cards, you want to write things that you feel like you could easily sit down and write about in the moment, right? Something very simplistic. On the yellow card, you are going to write down those things that, hey, Tanya, on the yellow card, you are going to write down those things that are going to take a little bit more of courage, a little bit more work for you to write through. And this, again, is about you really being honest and being willing to confront some things so that you can conquer them, right? So in your case, Tina, you said you want to start taking, you want to talk about how you got to the point that you started taking control of your life, right? And so some of your yellow cards might have pieces about what was happening in your life when you didn't have control, right? And so back to my example with 30-day stay, one of the things that went on a yellow card for me was the realization that I had to go into a shelter, because that was a very challenging decision for me to make. But I was afraid for my life, because the person who had shot me had not been apprehended. He knew where everybody in my family lived. So I felt like this was the best thing for my safety and my peace of mind. However, that was very challenging to write through. So going to the shelter was something that I wrote on a yellow card as opposed to a green card, right? And then once you have dumped all of your stuff on these index cards, you want to get your Post-its and organize your index cards. So you can see from this photo how these cards are in a line straight up and down. Above this yellow index card would likely be a Post-it, right? So that Post-it is going to be what you use to organize your dump, right? So again, for me, mine started with day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. I will also have some Post-its that said before the shelter. I had a Post-it that said like good times, right? Because the entirety of the relationship was not bad, but I needed to make sure that I had a good build up to what was, so that me being in the shelter made sense. So the dump is really about clearing your mind, getting everything out that you can think of, the good, the bad, the not so good, the ugly, and everything in between. And this process can take a while, because what will happen is when you start to put things on these index cards and then you go back through them as you organize them with your Post-its, more things will come out. And you can either add those to your cards, or you can create a new card for those other thoughts. Does that make sense? Is everybody with me so far on doing this dump? What happens from this dump is that you end up with anywhere between 30 to 100 writing prompts, which will help you each day, or each time you sit down to write. You won't be thinking, what do I write? Because you've already dumped all of this stuff out. And from these cards, more things will come, right? You might find that you write something on a card and then you need another card to really capture what it is. Like I said, I broke things down into a day, but even within those days, there were cards or there were notes on the back of those cards that were additional prompts for me to cover. So once you do your dump and then you organize them, or you use your Post-it notes to get some order, then you can move on to the next step. And the next step is to organize your chaos. So from the dump, from your index cards and your Post-its, you can create the outline for your book. Because now you've gotten everything out of your mind, right? You've gotten a little bit of some categories, or like I said, you can use your timeline, or excuse me, your Post-its to organize by categories or by days, kind of like how I did. You can do it by chronological order. You can use your Post-its to organize by people or characters in your book. You can do it by if your book, for example, talks about a process, you can use those Post-its to say step 1, step 2, step 3, and then once you have your Post-its in your dump, now you can create an outline for your book, which for some reason people think is of the utmost importance, having an outline. And if you're one of those people, then this process will really help you do that, because once you do this dump, and you really need to have some space to do your dump, right? So I suggest, like, if you don't have a desk or a workstation at home, your dining room table, having the opportunity to spread out and do it there. And then if you need to move it, you can put it on a cork board or a poster board where you can tape it or tack it on, and then you can use that to create an outline for your book. So you can begin to look at those index cards and those Post-its and say, okay, this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, this is chapter 3. You might even at that point be able to title your chapters or the sections of your book based on what you've dumped out and what you have been able to for the content you've been able to get out of your head and see visually. It'll start to make sense for you personally because it's your story. And again, this process, you should not start this process until you have your why, because all stories aren't intended to be told chronologically. So I don't want you to go in immediately and say, okay, let me organize this by time, because depending upon why you're telling this story, your book may not go necessarily in chronological order for it to be the most effective for those who will read it. Is everybody following me still? So you start with why, you do your dump, you organize your chaos, and then once you do that, then you want to create what I call your toolkit. And this is necessary as you move in to the commitment process, right? Because you want to set yourself up for success from the very beginning. So creating your toolkit is really about having the right pieces, or excuse me, the right tools to assist you to do the work of writing your book without any excuses. So I strongly encourage my clients to use Trello after doing the dump. And if you're not familiar with Trello, it is an electronic platform. It's web-based. You can do it on a computer or you can use an app. And it literally has a way for you to write index cards and then organize the index cards into lists. And then once you do that, you can write notes. You can literally do your dump, transfer your dump to Trello. And what you can do as you move through your outline and your dump on Trello is you can move your index card from the place where you need to write them to saying that it's complete, so that you can begin to see your progress as you're writing your book. Now, everybody isn't into technology as much. So if Trello is not for you, that's okay. You can keep your stack of index cards after you create your outline and you have them organized. You can literally work through that deck. And then you can use your notepad on your phone. Regardless of what kind of phone you have, there is a notepad on your phone. So you can use your notepad on your phone if you're not home. And, you have the opportunity, if you're carrying your index cards around and you want to be consistent. So maybe on your lunch break, you want to do some writing, but you can't do it on your work computer. So on your phone, in your notepad, you can begin to write based from your index cards. And if you have a smartphone, you could also download Google Docs and do the same thing, or you could do Evernote Evernote is another way that you could organize your dump and write daily. I strongly encourage all of my clients. In fact, I require my clients to use Google Docs when they work with me because it's a web-based platform. You can access it anywhere, and I can go in and edit and give feedback as they move through the writing process. But the thing is that your notepad, if you don't have Google Docs on your phone, if you're one of those people who just doesn't have the storage room to download it, if you are operating from your notepad and your phone on the go, you can always email your notes to yourself and then copy and paste them into your Google Doc. But if you are writing a book, I strongly encourage you to do the bulk of your writing, or have some type of system that you're going to use where you transfer everything to Google Docs, because it's such an easily accessible system, regardless of whether you have a PC or a Mac, regardless of whether you have an Android or an iPhone. It's pretty standard across the board. Anybody can use it. Editors use it. Anybody can access Google Docs. So these are some of the things you can have in your toolkit. Of course, those index cards and Post-its are part of your toolkit as well, but these are the electronic tools that I encourage you to at least consider. If you're not going to use all of them, like I said, I strongly encourage you to use at minimum Google Docs in your notepad. If you're the type of person who prefers to write everything down, that is fine. But even then, you need to have a system where you are transferring the things you are writing every so often into Google Docs. That could be every week, that could be bi-weekly, but in the process, you need to make sure that you have a backup so that if you misplace your notebook or, water spills on it, anything could happen with a notebook. So you just want to make sure you have a system in place in your toolkit that you are capturing what you are writing in a way that it is backed up so that you don't run into any issues. Any questions about that? Any questions about your toolkit? About any of these programs, or how to gain access to them, how you might utilize them? All right. Trying to make sure I'm not missing anything. Not missing anybody's comments. All right. So last but not least in this process is, like you ladies said, you are challenged by making the commitment and writing with intention. Because it's very easy to get excited about starting this process, doing the dump, and then if you're not intentional, then your stack of index cards and Post-its will be collecting dust on your dining room table, or they'll be in some box or some drawer somewhere where you have not gone back to revisit them. So when you, at the outset of the process, right, you want to be very intentional about the when and the where of how you are going to write. So you want to set aside specific time, right? Let's say after you do your dump, you have 200 index cards. And some of those index cards are going to take, 2,000 words. Some of them might only be a paragraph, but you really want to allow the time for each piece of your story. So you could say, okay, I'm going to start every morning. I'm going to wake up an hour early and write. Or 3 days a week on my lunch break, I'm going to go to the library and write. Or on these days of the week, I'm going to unplug from social media. I'm going to get a babysitter for the kids. I'm going to get some takeout and post up at Panera from 5 to 8, and I'm just going to write. no social media, no text, no phone calls. This is my writing time. And you might think it's extreme, but if you don't schedule it, it will not happen. You need to write it in your planner. You need to block it off on your calendar for those people that you share your calendar with, so they, and I can tell you, when I wrote 30-Day Stay, I did it first thing in the morning. I got everybody out the door. And as soon as my husband was gone for work, my kids were where they needed to be, I was up in my office, which is on the 3rd floor, writing. And they also knew that if they called me between certain hours, unless somebody was dying or on fire and they were calling me over and over again, I was not going to answer, because I needed to focus, and I was very committed to my writing time. And I don't want you to think that it has to be like legalism, or, like you're punishing yourself through the process. However, I want you to be very clear that it is going to take discipline to get to the destiny of becoming an author. It's not something that is very fly by night. You have to be committed to it. So once you dedicate the time, then you have to be very intentional again about the space. So if you have a local coffee shop in your neighborhood, or there's a crazy mocha where all of the people are going to be, that's probably not the best place for you to plan to write. Maybe at the library, which I know people don't think people go to the library anymore, but it's really a good place to write, especially in the evenings. In the afternoons, that's a little bit iffy, but in the evenings and early in the morning, the library is a great place to write. Coffee shops can be good places, but you have to be strategic about the coffee shop, because I will be honest, I go to coffee shops to work all of the time, and some coffee shops are turned up. Okay, it becomes very challenging to focus. People are in there with their pets. Like, it's a whole lot going on. So be intentional. And here's another place that people don't think about going very often, but it's a great place to write and work, and that is Barnes and Noble. So if you are close to a Barnes and Noble or any other bookstore, um, those are great places also to go and write. But it doesn't have to be outside of your home. You can find space in your home where you can write. And if you're intentional about the time you're going to set aside, then it'll be much easier to do it in your house, as long as you let people know. And that brings us to that last piece, which is support. The people who are closest to you need to be supporting you through this process. And that doesn't mean they have to sit there with you when you're writing. What that does mean, though, is that they need to respect that from this time to this time, I will be writing, and I will be writing in this area. That means, unless you're on fire, tell your dad, or, make a sandwich. There will not be dinner cooked this day, or whatever support you need. The people who live with you, the people who are closest to you, you need to let them know so you can help them help you. Does that make sense? Like I said, with my clients, I encourage them to do it first thing in the morning. Writing a book, just like any other new task that you are attempting, or anything else that you are trying to do that's new, requires you to stretch. So regardless of whether or not you are a morning person, if you are serious and committed to this process, I always challenge and encourage my clients to write in the morning. Start your day an hour earlier so that you can have some dedicated time writing first thing in the morning, when your mind is clear, before you've had to encounter somebody at your office getting on your nerves, before the kids wake up and are calling you, before you start reading your emails. Sit down in your quiet space and do some writing. So any questions about any of that? The time, the space, the support. Where do you feel like you will be most challenged to write with intention? Is it the time? Is it the space? Or is it the support? Trying to make sure I'm not missing any comments, ladies. Bear with me because I am challenged. So time. Tammy, you are going to have to get up earlier and write. You're going to have to do it before your day starts. And I say that, like I said, I encourage all my clients to do that. But because I know how busy your day is from start to finish, you're going to have to A, get up earlier to write, and B, start to shut down earlier in the evening so that you can get the rest necessary to get up earlier to write. Lachelle, same thing for you. You're going to have to get up earlier. And again, this goes back to where we started at the beginning with your why. Your why for writing this book should be enough to get you up out of the bed when you set that alarm. And I'll tell you, like I tell my clients, when you set your alarm to get up earlier, do not sleep with your phone or your alarm next to your bed. Set your alarm somewhere that's close enough that you can hear it when it goes off, but far enough away that you have to get up out of the bed to turn it off, because then you're more likely to stay up and do what you set your alarm to do. As it relates to support, Tina, if it's about having childcare, then I recommend that you consider your options. It may be that you will need to get up earlier as well before your children wake up. Especially if, Tammy, that's a lie. That's a lie. Excuse me. Tina, especially if you are working when your children are in school or other activities, then in order for you to have the support that you need, support yourself first and be honest when you look at your schedule. If you know there is not any time where you will have a dedicated 45 minutes to an hour to sit down and really commit to your writing without neglecting your children, then either writing first thing in the morning or writing in the evening is best. And while a lot of people feel like doing it in the evening will be best, I don't encourage that, because at the end of the evening, you're tired. The day has taken its toll on you. You just want to unwind. And so then if you wait until the end of the day, your writing becomes more of a chore than a purposeful activity that you're doing with intention. You're now doing it just because you want to mark it off your list and say that it's done. Yes, Lachelle, you do need to get on the why. A lot of people, like I said, people just do not know how big and important it is to have clarity. The challenge, however, is once you get the clarity, it is likely that you will be challenged again by the courage. And that is why I do the work that I do. So one of the ways that I offer support is through VIP Writing Days. But before I tell you about that, I want to do a little bit of a review. So number one is you need to start with why, right? You need to know why you're writing the book. Beyond the fact that becoming an author is on your bucket list, beyond the fact that you've had an experience, yes, Lisa, you do have to support yourself first. Beyond having had an experience that you think is, noteworthy, beyond people telling you you need to write a book, your why needs to be clear for you so that you can clearly communicate it through your writing. This step is number one. It's number one how you start writing your book today is you get clear about your why. Then you dump your mind. And we talked about using the index cards and the Post-its to do that. And then number three is you organize your chaos. So once you've done your dump, you can use your index cards and your Post-its to create an outline, which will give you your roadmap for your book. And also you will have writing prompts for days if you do the dump properly. And then you need to create your toolkit. You need to be very intentional about saying, okay, these are the tools I can use to support me in my writing journey. Do I need to download some apps? Do I need to, get these things on my computer? Is it my notepad? Is it Evernote, Google Docs? Make sure you have your toolkit in order before you start the journey, so you aren't feeling like you're lacking something once you get into the thick of things, or you find that because you've been on the go, you haven't been able to get on your computer. You can use these things on your phone. And then finally, you need to write with intention. You need to be very intentional about setting aside the time, having a particular space, and having the support. Yes, and speaking and writing are very different. Obviously, it takes a little longer to write than it does to speak something. And the process is also different because while speaking can be very transparent and it can be impactful, there are some details that you cannot get into specifically in a speaking engagement the way you can in a book. And so we talked about in the beginning, Tam, before you got here, how when you do your dump, you need 2 different color index cards. One color for things that are very easy for you to write, and another color for those things that cause you to stop, or that you're going to need some additional courage to write through. And so when it comes to speaking, you can kind of leave some of those things out and still be impactful. But when it comes to writing a book, it's a bit more of a process of being naked, right? And it's not selective. When you speak, it's kind of selective. You know the audience, right? Even if you don't know everybody who's going to be present, you know the audience that you are going to be speaking to. When you write a book, anybody can buy it. When somebody goes on Amazon to buy my book, I have no idea who they are. All I know is I get a royalty payment. So that means that, you're exposed in a wider array, to a wider audience. And that's why the writing with intention piece is so important. That's why I encourage people to have support. And of course, that is why I do what I do. So one of the ways that I help women who are really ready to make the commitment to writing their book is through the Writer Unblocked VIP Day. And the reason why I started doing the Writer Unblocked VIP Day is because I would get clients who would say they're ready to write a book, they need some support, they need accountability. And when we would start to work together, I would recognize how unclear they were about not only the process and the commitment it takes to write a book, but why they were writing the book. And so during the Writer Unblocked VIP Day, we spend a large amount of time really working through and helping you to get clarity about what it is you're really writing and why it is that you are going to be writing what you're writing. And this opens up so much for you as a writer. This is what gives you the breakthroughs that you need to be able to get to the next piece, which is direction. And we do that through the dump. And while you can do the dump on your own, when you have someone who is outside of your story looking in to what you are putting on those index cards, you will get some additional insight into some things that maybe you haven't considered need to be written about or need to be dealt with a little deeper than you would do on your own. So I spend a lot of time with clients during the Writer Unblocked VIP Day going through what's being dumped and why that, and why not this, and what does this mean, and how did you feel, and what were you thinking, and how would someone else feel about this? So all of the things that go into writing the story. And then when you leave the Writer Unblocked VIP Day, you not only have the clarity, you not only have the direction, you have confidence in your story, because once you get clear on your why, you're much more confident in what it is that you are setting out to do. It has so much more power. It makes so much more sense. And there is much more of a sense of urgency, right? It's not something that you can be lax about anymore. You have to get it out. And then you have a plan. You have your writing prompts, you have your outline, you have a specific roadmap and a timeline for what is going to take, what you are going to have to be willing to sacrifice so that you can have the support and the time and the space to get this done. And so this is because what I've shared with you will work. But the question is, do you have the clarity, the courage, and are you committed enough to do it without support? And that's the question that you really have to ask yourself honestly. This is a testimonial from one of the clients who I recently did a Writer Unblocked VIP Day with. And it's funny because she was so hesitant. She signed up for a longer term program, which included the Writer Unblocked VIP Day. And she was very hesitant to commit to the VIP Day because it is 7 to 8 hours, very intimate timing with you and me and your story. We have breakfast together, we have lunch together, and we really dig into and do the work of getting your book like out of your head and into a space where you can really see it coming to life. And so she shared that, she didn't think we needed to be together for so long, but she found out why we needed that committed time. And she left so much more clear, so much more confident in her story and in her ability to tell her story, right? Because it's one thing to be confident about the fact that you have a powerful story to tell. It's something completely different to be confident in your ability to tell the story. Does that make sense? So this review is from Lakina Lachey, which is her pen name. Her book actually was very recently released. It is called Broken Pieces. It's available on Amazon, and it debuted as a number 2 when she released it on Amazon. So here is her review of her Writer Unblocked VIP Day experience. My VIP experience with Tiff Huff was exactly what I had been looking for. I had been looking at so many people's social media pages to find the right fit for what I needed to complete my book. I wasn't sure why we needed to have hours together at the time, but I sure did find out. I could have sat with her for a few more hours. She was hands-on and knew how to guide me the way I needed. She spoke my language. I felt like she was jumping into my story with me. We were together. I didn't feel alone. I'm so looking forward to our next session. Tiff Huff is the real deal. So I want to both challenge and encourage you to be willing to seek support, be willing to invest in God's best, and be willing and open to, the possibilities that are available to increase the impact and potential income that you have to make when you are getting the support that you need to do the dream. So you can schedule your breakthrough session with the link in my bio. It is bit.ly, the link in the show notes. It is bit.ly/yourbouncebackguide. And we can spend some time talking through how I can help you to make sure that your book is published. In fact, we can make it happen this year. And, you can be a chart topper just like Lakina Lachey. Before I let you go, I have to remind you to please leave a review if you have not already. When you do, you are not only being a blessing to me, you are being a blessing to other beacons who need this community, need the support, need the guide as she builds her bounce back blueprint. And of course, before I let you go, God is not going to play you. But if you think that you can start writing your book without the time, space, and support, sis, you are playing yourself. Be blessed.